Greetings, space truckers. Night of the Living Dead is a movie that really needs no introduction. This 1968 horror classic gave birth to the zombie genre as we know it. George A. Romero, of course, is the godfather of zombies because of this. This low-budget indie flick shocked and disgusted audiences when it was released and went on to become one of the most profitable indie films and one of the most beloved horror films of all time. And I, a self-described horror fan, have never been able to finish it. Growing up, I was a big horror fan. Now, the tiny town that I grew up in had one video store, which was also a gas station. They had an okay horror selection, but the real treat was when we got to go to the bigger town 30 minutes away to BJ's Books, Music, and Movies. They had a much better selection, and they had a 777 deal. That was 7 movies for 7 days, all for $7. Man, we'd stock up horror, and more horror, with the occasional sci-fi or fantasy flick thrown in. We'd binge movies all weekend, and whatever we didn't get to, we watched throughout the rest of the week without even worrying about late fees. Good times, man. Good times. Now, I was a big fan of zombies from the moment I saw Night of the Living Dead. But here's the thing. The Night of the Living Dead that I saw was actually the 1990 remake directed by special effects legend and sex machine Tom Savini. I didn't know this was a remake. I thought this was the original. I'm pretty sure it's also the first zombie movie I ever saw, so it set the standard for me for what zombies were. Slow, unthinking, unreasoning, unstoppable. I loved this movie. So later on, when I found out about the real original Night of the Living Dead, I of course wanted to watch it, but I will admit to some trepidation on my part because the film was in black and white. For some reason, I always had this aversion to older horror movies, especially black and white ones. And while I've always liked the classic Universal monsters, Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, I never got into the movies. I was really into gory special effects and the feeling of being scared. And the older horror movies didn't have the blood and guts, and they weren't scary to me, so they just didn't do anything for me. So in my unenlightened mind, Night of the Living Dead being black and white, got it automatically lumped in with these. Night of the Living Dead is directed by George A. Romero, who also did the other 2 zombie movies that I obsessed over, Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead. These 2 movies are amazing. They're full of great action, great characters, and awesome, disgusting special effects by Tom Savini himself. I watched them countless times. So, I put on Night of the Living Dead, and I was immediately confused. The zombies weren't behaving like the zombies that I knew and loved and feared from Night of the Living Dead in 1990 and Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead. One of the first zombies that you see displays surprising speed and intellect. He knows to smash the headlights of the car in order to make escape more difficult. Seeing this, I'll admit I was immediately kind of turned off, and I stopped the movie shortly after. Outside of a few notable exceptions, I'm not really a fan of fast zombies. The Dawn of the Dead remake is pretty good, and Days Gone is a phenomenal video game. But beyond that, I like my zombies slow. There's no such thing as a fast and smart zombie. That's a ghoul. Zombies are slow and unyielding. They never stop coming. And there's no plan, no tactics in their pursuit of you. They just keep moving. Run all you want, you'll eventually have to rest. The zombie doesn't. They can't be reasoned with. They're not attacking out of hate or anger. They're like a swarm of insects. They're running on pure stimulus, nothing else. They're hungry, your food, 2 + 2 = 4. It's as simple as that. That's why I love them. Night, Dawn, and Day are a loosely connected trilogy. So why are the zombies fast and smart in Night but display no speed or intelligence in Dawn or Day, with the exception of Bub? It always felt inconsistent to me. And for this reason, the 90s version of Night of the Living Dead always meshed better to me with Dawn and Day than the original did. And I know people have come up with theories as to why a zombie might be fast, like fresh zombies still retain a little bit of their muscle control and intelligence, and then as they are zombies longer, the more they decay, they lose all of that, and so then they become the slower, dumber zombies. And I can dig that. That, in a weird way, that kind of makes sense. So Night of the Living Dead being the start of the zombie plague, you could say that they're all fresh, they all retain a lot more of their motor skills and reasoning. Dawn of the Dead is later, so they've all been around longer, they're slower and dumber now. And Day of the Dead is sort of seeing the first steps in them evolving almost into a new species, with Bub being able to learn and reason. I've tried watching Night of the Living Dead at least 3 or 4 times, and I've got to be honest, I don't think I even made it past the first act. Now, remember how I said that I never got into the Universal monster movies, even though I liked the Universal monsters themselves? Well, in this, the year of our Lord, 2023, the missus and I have decided that for the month of October, my favorite month, we are going to watch the old Universal monster movies, and guess what? I'm loving them! So far, we've watched Dracula, Frankenstein, The Bride of Frankenstein, and I am blown away by the awesome special effects, the great characters, the gorgeous cinematography, and the fantastic stories. And I have to give a hat tip to James Rolfe over at Cinemassacre for actually helping me to see these movies in a different light. To paraphrase him, he suggested to look at these movies not as scary horror movies, but just as great stories with great characters. It's a simple idea, something I'd never thought of, but watching these movies with that frame of mind has completely opened me up to them. I still don't think the younger me would enjoy these movies anyway. I was too much about the scares and the gross outs back then. But the older, more mature me has certainly found a new appreciation for these movies. And you know what? That's just the way it is. Sometimes you need somebody else to help you see things in a different light, and sometimes you just gotta grow up a little bit first. So, with that in mind, it's time for me to finally revisit and finish the original Night of the Living Dead. Let's go. Aw, hell, let's be honest. I already knew going in that I was going to enjoy this movie, so no use beating around the bush or playing coy on that front. My youthful naivete is really what kept me from enjoying this movie earlier, but better late than never, as they say. I still like the 1990 version better, just because that's the first one that I saw and it made its mark on me. And plus, it's just a really good movie besides. So I wasn't expecting to suddenly like this one more than that one, but I am glad I watched it because this movie kicks ass. The first thing I noticed is that this movie has really good cinematography. It's like the whole thing is shot in almost a slightly soft focus, so it lends it this really bizarre, almost dreamlike look. Like it's almost not reality, it's a little off-kilter. And speaking of off-kilter, I do loves me a good Dutch angle, and this movie's got it in spades. Now, I don't want Dutch angles overused. We don't want Battlefield Earth levels of Dutch angle. That's a little too much. But it's such a great tool for keeping the audience off balance and making them feel like they just can't get comfortable. And I like that. I think it's used really well in this movie. Now, I will say that this movie's zombies display a little more intelligence than I like my zombies showing. I'm real picky on what constitutes a zombie versus a revenant or a ghoul. Revenants and ghouls, to me, they're the undead. That's where the undead really start being able to display intelligence, and zombies, to me, work best when they're just these unthinking insect-like hordes. That's what I love about zombies. And so when they're picking up rocks to smash out headlights or arming themselves basically with clubs and bludgeons and things later on to attack the house's fortifications, that's a little far for me. but it's not as egregious as I thought it was going to be. And yeah, there are exceptions to the rule, like later on with Bub, or that one zombie in Return of the Living Dead who gets on the CB and calls for more paramedics.
Rescue 7, come in. This is dispatch. Do you copy over?
Come in, dispatch. Send more paramedics.
Like, that scene is great, but that's also more of a comedy, and, you know, it gets a pass because of that. But by and large, I like hordes of slow, dumb zombies. Now, this is before the whole rules of zombies were kind of laid down. And to be fair, they're called or mentioned as ghouls, even by one of the broadcasters in the movie.
So long as this situation remains, government spokesmen warn that dead bodies will continue to be transformed into the flesh-eating ghouls.
So, while I still don't think they're ghouls in this movie, this was before things were really set in concrete, so I can forgive it a bit. One of the other things that I've always wondered, and not just in this movie, but I know I've seen other movies where people do this too, is when they're boarding up the windows in a house, why do they nail the boards up all willy-nilly instead of in a more uniform, what looks like a more thought-out way? Like, is it just for the visual, like the craziness, like, oh, the desperation, we didn't have time, so we just threw stuff up there? Because, I mean, if you've got time to nail up boards willy-nilly, you've got time to put them up in a cleaner fashion, a more efficient fashion. Just a little nitpick for me. I've seen it many times, and it's just never made sense to me. And just like in the 1990 version, I love Ben in this movie. Ben was one of my favorite characters back in the 90s, played by Candyman himself, Tony Todd. So that was another reason I really liked that movie, because I was a big Candyman fan back then. Tony Todd's a great actor. But Ben is just such a great character because while everybody around him is losing their heads or going kind of nuts, he's keeping his cool, he's problem solving, he's really trying to work things out and figure out how to get through this, and he really takes command and control, and he's just such a great character because of that.
Listen, I got a kid down there. She can't possibly, I couldn't bring her up here. She can't possibly take all the racket and those things smashing through the windows.
Well, you're her father. If you're stupid enough to go die in that trap, that's your business. However, I am not stupid enough to follow you. It is tough for the kid that old man is so stupid. Now, you get the hell down in the cellar. You can be the boss down there. I'm boss up here.
I always like to think that maybe that's how I would behave in a situation like this, but who knows? I might actually be more like the dad who loses his nut, or Barbara even.
Only 10 more minutes? We don't have very long to wait. We can leave. Well, we'd better leave soon. It's 10 minutes to 3.
Barbara's useless in this movie, man. I seem to remember, I haven't watched the 90s one in a while, but I feel like she actually had her shit together a little more in that movie. In this one, she's almost kind of fucking annoying, man.
Don't be afraid of me. I'm Helen Cooper, Harry's wife.
Now, one of the things I remember hearing people complain about the 90s version versus this one is that I'd heard that it was a shot-for-shot remake of the original, which, I mean, sure, it's got a lot of the same, I mean, it's a remake of the movie, so it's going to have a lot of the same stuff in it, but it's really not shot for shot. In fact, you know, some of the characters behave differently, certain things play out differently, and the ending is a lot different between the two. Maybe not a lot different, but different. Different enough that I think that's what makes the 90s version a really good remake. It's not a slavish clone of the original, but it also doesn't go so far with trying to do original stuff that it doesn't resemble the original in any way. I think the 90s version is probably a textbook example of how to do a remake really well. It's funny, when the Dawn of the Dead remake came out, directed by Zack Snyder, I remember complaining that if the original Dawn of the Dead is so great that it's worth spending money on a remake, why is nobody giving George A. Romero money to just make a new zombie movie? I was like, screw that movie. I went and watched it and wound up actually liking it. And to be fair, not all of George A. Romero's zombie movies are great. Now, Night, Dawn, and Day are good. Land of the Dead is pretty good. I watched that one in theaters, and it's all right. Again, it goes a little farther with the whole bub thing and zombies gaining intelligence and kind of becoming a new separate species. It's okay. I didn't see Diary of the Dead, but Survival of the Dead, it's kind of a mess. I really did not like that movie. But anyway, belly aching about all that aside, one of the other things that I think Night of the Living Dead is really great for is showing people just what is possible with a shoestring budget. I think all aspiring filmmakers ought to watch this movie and movies like it to show them what's really possible when they prioritize creativity over budget. Right now, Hollywood is in a pretty dark era where filmmakers are given unlimited budgets and everything is just fixed in post. Movies are being shot with unfinished scripts. They undergo massive, sometimes total reshoots. Everything is shot on green screen or volume, and as a result, the movies are just bloated, meandering messes. And those giant budgets make it harder to even turn a profit. So they have to dilute everything down to make the movie appeal to the broadest audience possible, which makes for bland, watered-down pablum. It sounds paradoxical, but I think limitations actually wind up freeing creatives, not restricting them. When you don't have the option to just throw money at a problem, you instead have to get imaginative with your filmmaking. And the ones who rise to this challenge wind up becoming creative juggernauts who are able to solve their problems in interesting and clever ways. You'll hear me say it 1,000,000 times. A big budget does not a good movie make. I actually think it's more possible to make a good $3 million movie than a good $300 million movie. Because good, tight writing, clever, creative direction, and passionate performances from the actors can hide a small budget better than a big budget can hide half-assed sloppiness. And Night of the Living Dead has creativity in spades. It's actually a very tiny, claustrophobic movie with very few shooting locations. But through clever use of radio and TV broadcasts, it manages to feel like there's actually an entire world out there facing this zombie epidemic, while actually showing almost none of it. Later movies in the Dead series had bigger budgets to show off large hordes of zombies, but Night of the Living Dead pulling off that same feeling without really showing any of that is really damn impressive. One more recent movie that pulls off the same thing to an even greater extreme is Pontypool. Almost the entire movie takes place in a single room, and there are maybe 5 characters, and I think you see 3 whole zombies in the whole movie. But through broadcasts, phone calls, and the performances of the cast, you really feel like the whole world has gone to hell. It's a really fantastic movie. Stephen McHattie is awesome in it. If you like Night of the Living Dead, check out Pontypool. So there you go. After 40 years on this earth, I can finally apply to get my official horror fan card. Night of the Living Dead is a phenomenal movie that I wish I hadn't waited so long to check out. Is it scary? Not really, but that's not this movie's fault. I've been pretty thoroughly desensitized by all the horror movies I've watched over the years. So it's a pretty rare movie that actually scares me. But it is a fantastic movie that definitely stands the test of time. While other movies from around the same time feel a little dated or past their prime, I think the creativity and the craftsmanship that went into this one really helps it to hold up. And I can definitely see myself watching this movie again in the future. And with that, it's time to say so long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, adieu, happy Halloween, and adios, mofos. And finish the original Night of the Living... God damn it. But an older, more mature me has seen him in a new light. My youthful naivety... that word. Naivety? Naivete. My youthful naivety... Jesus.